History is decided by whispers.
A small lie changed history forever.
A small lie that changed history forever. The Betrayal at Manzikert, 1071. Introduction. History is often written in blood, but it is decided by whispers. We tend to believe that empires fall because of massive invasions, plagues, or economic collapse. But sometimes, the end of a civilization can be traced back to a single moment, a single sentence spoken by one man who prioritized his political ambition over the survival of his people. This is the story of the Battle of Manzikert and the lie that opened the gates of the West to the East. Chapter 1. The Golden Illusion. Constantinople, 1070 A.D. To the outside world, the Byzantine Empire looked eternal. It was the continuation of Rome, a beacon of civilization that had stood for over 700 years while the rest of Europe languished in the Dark Ages. The walls of Constantinople were impregnable. Its gold reserves were vast. Its churches were filled with the smoke of incense and the chanting of priests. But beneath the gold leaf, the wood was rotting. The Macedonian dynasty, which had brought the empire to its height, was dead. In its place was a power vacuum. The civil bureaucracy, composed of wealthy aristocrats and scholars, hated the military aristocracy. They believed that a strong army was a threat to their own power. Over decades, they had systematically dismantled the empire's defenses, disbanded the native thematic armies, and replaced them with unreliable mercenaries. Into this chaos stepped Romanos IV Diogenes. He was a soldier emperor, a man of the sword, chosen by the Empress Eudokia to save the crumbling frontiers. He was brave, handsome, and capable, but he was an outsider to the royal Ducas family, the powerful bureaucratic clan that felt the throne belonged to them. The stage was set. Romanos wanted to save the empire. The Ducas family wanted to rule it, even if there was nothing left to rule. Chapter 2. The Rising Storm in the East. While Constantinople played politics, a new storm was gathering on the eastern horizon. The Seljuk Turks, led by the brilliant and noble Sultan Alp Arslan, whose name meant heroic lion, were sweeping through Persia and into Anatolia. The Seljuks were different from the enemies Byzantium had faced before. They were nomadic horse archers, fast, elusive, and deadly. They did not want to conquer Constantinople. Their eyes were set on Fatimid Egypt. But to secure his flank, Alp Arslan needed to ensure Byzantium would not attack him from the rear. Romanos IV understood what the bureaucrats in the capital did not. Anatolia was the lungs of the empire. It provided the food, the horses, and the soldiers. If Anatolia fell to the Turkish raids, the empire would suffocate. In the spring of 1071, Romanos made a decision. He would not wait for the enemy. He gathered the largest army Byzantium had seen in years, over 40,000 men, and marched east. His goal was not just to defend the border, but to crush the Seljuk threat permanently. Chapter 3. An Army of Strangers. The army that marched out of Constantinople was impressive in size, but hollow in spirit. It was a Tower of Babel. There were Frankish heavy cavalry, Pecheneg horsemen from the steppes, Norman adventurers, and weary Byzantine infantry. Many of these mercenaries had not been paid in months. They spoke different languages and worshipped different gods. But the most dangerous element was not the mercenaries, it was the command structure. To appease the powerful Ducas family, Romanos made a fatal error. He gave a high command position to Andronicus Ducas. Andronicus was the nephew of the former emperor and a leading member of the faction that hated Romanos. Andronicus did not want Romanos to succeed. A victory for Romanos meant the Ducas family would be locked out of power forever. As the army marched across the blistering heat of the Anatolian plateau, the soldiers were already whispering. Equipment was failing, logistics were breaking down, and in the command tent, Andronicus Ducas watched the emperor with cold, calculating eyes.
Chapter 4. The Intelligence Failure. August 1071, Eastern Anatolia. The campaign was plagued with bad luck and worse decisions. Thinking that Alp Arslan was far away in Syria, Romanos split his army. He sent his best general, Joseph Tarchoniades, with nearly half the forces, including the elite Norman mercenaries, to secure the fortress of Chliat. History still does not know exactly what happened to Tarchoniades. Did he encounter the Turks and flee? Did he betray the emperor? Regardless, he and half the army vanished from the campaign, never to return. Romanos was left with only half his strength, roughly 20,000 to 25,000 men. He marched towards the fortress of Manzikert, unaware that Sultan Alp Arslan was not in Syria. The heroic lion had been informed of the Byzantine movement and had force-marched his army north. While Romanos was expecting a siege against a garrison, he was walking directly into the jaws of the entire Seljuk army. Chapter 5. The Contact. The realization came too late. As the Byzantine foragers went out, they were cut down by arrows from invisible enemies. The hills around Manzikert were alive. Alp Arslan, looking down from the heights, saw the Byzantine formation. He was actually outnumbered. The Byzantine heavy infantry and cataphracts, armored cavalry, were technically superior to his light horse archers. Alp Arslan, a man of prudence, offered a peace treaty. He had no desire to destroy the Byzantine Empire. He wanted to secure his borders so he could fight in Egypt. Romanos rejected the offer. He could not return to Constantinople with a peace treaty. His political enemies would call him a coward. He needed a decisive victory to secure his throne. He replied to the Sultan's envoys, "There shall be no truce until I am in your camp." The die was cast. There would be blood. Chapter 6. The Battle Begins. August 26, 1071, Friday. The battle took place on a dusty plain. Romanos arranged his troops in a traditional formation. He commanded the center. The left wing was under Bryennios, the right wing under Aliates, and in the rear, commanding the reserve guard, the safety net of the army, was Andronicus Ducas. As the Byzantine heavy cavalry charged, the Seljuks did what they did best. They retreated. It was the classic feigned retreat. They refused to engage in close combat, riding backward while firing arrows into the heavy Byzantine armor. All afternoon, Romanos chased shadows. The Byzantine army marched forward, capturing the Turkish camp, but failing to crush the Turkish army. They were exhausted, thirsty, and their lines were beginning to stretch dangerously thin. By late afternoon, the sun began to set. The shadows grew long. Romanos realized he could not catch the Turks before dark. He knew that spending the night in the open, exposed to archers, would be suicide. Chapter 7. The Moment of the Lie. This was the pivotal moment of the millennium. Romanos ordered the imperial standard, the flag, to be turned backward. This was a standard military signal, meaning, reverse the line, we are returning to camp in good order. It was a risky maneuver, but standard practice. The front line had to turn its back to the enemy to retreat. As the center began to turn, the Turkish archers saw their chance and attacked aggressively. The Byzantine wings, already separated from the center, began to panic. There was confusion, but not yet a rout. The army looked to the reserve force for support. They looked to Andronicus Ducas.
It was Andronicus's duty to bring the reserve forward to cover the emperor's retreat. If he advanced, the Seljuks would be held back and the army would survive. Instead, Andronicus Ducas spoke the lie that killed an empire. He turned to the reserve troops and shouted, "The emperor is defeated. He is fleeing. Save yourselves." He did not just fail to help, he actively spread disinformation. He turned his horse around and marched the entire reserve force away from the battlefield, abandoning the emperor to his fate.
Chapter 8. The Collapse. The effect of the lie was instantaneous and catastrophic. Seeing the reserve force, their safety net, fleeing the field, the right wing assumed the emperor was dead. They broke and ran. The left wing, seeing the right wing collapse, disintegrated. Romanos IV Diogenes was left alone in the center. The king of the Romans, the ruler of the greatest city on earth, was suddenly fighting for his life in the dust. The Seljuk trap snapped shut. Thousands of horse archers surrounded the isolated center division. Romanos fought like a lion. History records that his horse was killed under him. He stood his ground, swinging his sword until his hand was injured and he was overwhelmed by the weight of numbers. For the first time in centuries, a Roman emperor was captured alive on the battlefield. Chapter 9. The Emperor in Chains. The interaction between Romanos and Alp Arslan is one of the most famous in history. When Romanos was brought before the Sultan, he was covered in dust, blood, and rags. Alp Arslan couldn't believe this was the emperor. He made Romanos kiss the ground, placing his foot on the emperor's neck, a symbolic gesture of total victory. But then the Sultan raised him and treated him with kindness. Alp Arslan asked, "What would you do if I were brought before you as a prisoner?" Romanos replied bitterly, "I would have killed you or paraded you through the streets of Constantinople." Alp Arslan smiled and said, "My punishment is far heavier. I forgive you and I set you free." The Sultan did not want to destroy Byzantium. He asked for a ransom, a marriage alliance, and the return of some cities. He released Romanos, calling him brother. Alp Arslan believed he had made a friend on the throne of Rome. Chapter 10. The Price of Treason. If the story ended here, Byzantium might have survived. But the lie told by Andronicus Ducas had already traveled to Constantinople. The Ducas family declared Romanos deposed. They installed their own puppet, Michael VII. When Romanos returned, hoping to regain his throne and honor his treaty with the Sultan, he was not welcomed as a survivor. He was hunted down as a usurper. The Ducas forces defeated Romanos in a civil war. They promised him safety if he surrendered. He did. They lied again. They took Romanos, the man who had fought for them, and brutally blinded him with a hot poker. The infection killed him shortly after. When Alp Arslan heard that his blood brother had been tortured and killed by his own people, he considered the treaty void. He unleashed his Turkmen tribes into Anatolia. There was no army left to stop them. The Byzantine army had destroyed itself in the civil war caused by the lie. Epilogue. Within 10 years, the Turks had reached the Aegean Sea. The heartland of the empire was gone. Desperate, the Byzantines wrote to the Pope in Rome for help. The Pope responded by calling for the First Crusade. The lie told by Andronicus Ducas at Manzikert did not just lose a battle, it destroyed the Byzantine army, lost Anatolia, triggered the Crusades, and set the stage for centuries of conflict between East and West. The empire limped on for another 400 years, but it was a walking corpse. The war was truly lost the moment Andronicus Ducas decided that his political ambition was more important than the truth. Chapter 11. The Hollow Throne. Constantinople, 1072
1074 AD. With Romanos IV dead and buried, the Ducas family believed they had won. They had eliminated their rival and secured the crown for their puppet, Michael VII. But winning the throne and ruling the empire were two very different things. Michael VII was nicknamed Parapinakes, meaning minus a quarter, because under his rule the currency devalued so rapidly that a gold coin bought a quarter less wheat than before. While the court celebrated their political victory, the empire's economy was entering freefall. The lie of Manzikert shattered the army's morale, but the execution of Romanos shattered the army's loyalty. In the east, the frontier garrisons stopped taking orders from Constantinople. Why should they die for a government that blinded their hero? The defensive line, which had held for centuries, simply evaporated. Sultan Alp Arslan was dead, assassinated by a rebel commander shortly after Manzikert, and his son Malik Shah took over. But Malik Shah didn't need to invade. He simply allowed his Turkmen tribal leaders, the Beys, to migrate into Anatolia. They drifted into Anatolia not as an invading army, but as settlers. They found the gates open. They found fields undefended. The local Christian population, overtaxed and ignored by Constantinople, often welcomed the Turks as a relief from the corrupt Byzantine bureaucracy. The Ducas family sat on the throne, wearing the purple robes of power, ruling over a map that was burning away at the edges.
Chapter 12. The Wolf in the Fold. Anatolia, 1075 AD. Nature abhors a vacuum, and power is no different. With the imperial army destroyed and the central government paralyzed, a new kind of predator emerged, the rogue warlord. Enter Roussel de Bayeul. To a Western audience, Roussel is a familiar archetype, a Norman adventurer, a knight of fortune, a man carved from the same stone as William the Conqueror. He had been hired by the Byzantines to help fight the Turks, but after Manzikert, Roussel realized something dangerous. The empire is weak. Why should I serve it when I can carve out my own kingdom? Leading a band of 3,000 hardened Frankish and Norman knights, Roussel didn't attack the Turks, he attacked the Byzantines. He seized a massive chunk of central Anatolia, declaring himself an independent prince. The irony was bitter. The Byzantines had hired mercenaries to save them from the Turks, and now those mercenaries were carving up the empire from the inside. Desperate, the emperor in Constantinople made a decision that proved how far the empire had fallen. He sent a secret message to the Turks. He offered to pay the Seljuks to destroy his own Norman mercenary. The lie of Manzikert had come full circle. The Byzantines were now hiring their enemies to kill their allies. Chapter 13. The Rise of Alexios. Constantinople, 1081 AD. The chaos could not last forever. The empire was shrinking daily. Civil wars raged. The economy was dead. The people of Constantinople were rioting, demanding a savior. They found one in a young general named Alexios Komnenos. Alexios is one of history's great survivors. He was intelligent, pragmatic, and ruthless when necessary. He saw that the Ducas regime was leading the empire to extinction. In a daring coup, he seized the throne, forcing the incompetent Michael VII into a monastery. But the crown Alexios inherited was a crown of thorns. He opened the treasury. It was empty. He inspected the arsenals. They were bare. He looked at the map. The Turks held almost all of Anatolia. The Normans were attacking from Italy. The Pechenegs were raiding from the north. The Byzantine Empire was effectively reduced to the city of Constantinople and a few coastal strips. Alexios spent the first years of his reign in the saddle, rushing from one fire to another, fighting a desperate defensive war.
He managed to stabilize the Balkans, but he knew he could not retake Anatolia alone. He lacked manpower. The lie of Manzikert had cost him the native recruiting grounds. He needed soldiers. He needed knights. He needed the West. Chapter 14. The Letter That Changed the World. The Council of Piacenza, 1095 A.D. Alexios Komnenos sat in his study, writing a letter that would alter the trajectory of human civilization. It was addressed to Pope Urban II in Rome. Alexios was a proud man. The Eastern Orthodox and Catholic West had been in schism, split, since 1904. There was bad blood between them, but survival outweighed pride. In his letter, Alexios crafted a masterclass of diplomatic persuasion. He did not ask for a massive invasion. He asked for mercenaries. He wrote of the suffering of Christians in the East, exaggerating slightly for effect. He appealed to the Pope's duty to protect the faith. "Come to our aid," the message essentially said. "Send me knights to help push back the Turks, and we will protect the gateway to Europe." Alexios expected a few thousand professional soldiers, men like Roussel de Bayeul, but under contract. He wanted a small, manageable force to help him reconquer Anatolia. He had no idea what he was unleashing. Chapter 15. The Final Irony. Constantinople, 1096 A.D. and beyond. Alexios Komnenos stood on the walls of Constantinople and watched in horror. He had asked for a scalpel. The West had sent a sledgehammer. Tens of thousands of crusaders arrived, peasants, fanatics, impoverished knights, and ambitious princes. They were not there to save the Byzantine Empire. They were there to liberate Jerusalem. They viewed the sophisticated Greek-speaking Byzantines with suspicion. To the rough crusaders, the Byzantines looked effeminate, duplicitous, and untrustworthy. The cultural clash was immediate. The Byzantines remembered the betrayal of Manzikert and trusted no one. The Crusaders felt the Byzantines were not helping enough. The armies crossed into Anatolia. They did push back the Turks temporarily. They did capture Jerusalem in 1099, but the damage to the relationship between East and West was permanent. Conclusion. The lie spoken by Andronicus Ducas in 1071 had a blast radius of 500 years. Because of that lie, the Byzantine army collapsed. Because the army collapsed, Anatolia was lost. Because Anatolia was lost, Alexios asked the West for help. Because he asked for help, the Crusades began. And here lies the tragic finale. The Crusaders, who came to save the East, eventually turned on it. In 1204, the Fourth Crusade would not march to Jerusalem. Instead, they would sack Constantinople itself, burning the library, looting the gold, and destroying the city far more effectively than any Turkish army ever had. When the Ottoman Turks finally took Constantinople in 1453, they were kicking down a door that had already been unhinged centuries earlier. History is a chain of iron links. One broken link, one moment of selfishness by a man named Ducas on a dusty field in Manzikert, doomed the Rome of the East. The war was indeed lost before it began, but the echoes of that loss would scream through history for 1,000 years.